Hi, I'm Miss Chips, and I'm coming home with my first computer. It'd be nice if I had a helping hand. Oh, Hansel, maybe you can lend me a paw. I'm going to set the computer up here so that we can work from scratch to put the computer together, find out what all its pieces are, how they fit, and hopefully turn it on. Now, while we are doing this in the living room, this is not exactly the place where we would set a computer up in our home. You probably would set it up in either your den, in the work area, the library, but somewhere where you know that the computer is going to stay. It is not a piece of equipment that you move about the house. Now, there are several things that we have to make note come in this box. Oh, by the way, just for your own benefit, if you have a necklace on, take it off. Just like a typist, don't let it get caught in the box or in the equipment. So I'll set mine aside. Now let's get the first piece of this computer out of the box. On the top, by the way, also, you know that computers have warranties to them. Most of the time, those warranties last for a year. So I suggest that while you would like to take this box and throw it out, that you put it safely in your attic or in your basement. Now, the first thing in the box that will probably be right on top of the computer is the keyboard. Let's put the keyboard aside here and wait until we have the computer out of the box. Now, the computer probably is in this box safely in some pieces of styrofoam to keep it from rattling when the box is being shipped. Now, set the computer down where you can easily get at all the connectors on the back. Finally, now the next piece of equipment is the piece that is the most prominent and the one which you're most used to seeing and identifying with a computer. And this is the monitor, or the screen, from which you do all of your work. Now let's take the monitor and all of its cables and the computer and turn it around so that it will face you. There. Now, I'm going to take the keyboard, put it in the front here, in preparation for hooking it up, and then let's go check and make sure we have everything out of the box. Let's see if there's anything left. Oh, I see. Oh, only kidding. Actually, the monitor didn't come in this box either. But you have to know that everything does come in a separate box, and there are pieces that you mustn't miss, like the power cord and the cable that connects the monitor to the computer. There are several kinds of cords that we need to identify here and keep straight as we're setting the computer up. The first one, and the simplest one, the one most familiar to you, is the power cord. Now note this power cord looks different from an extension cord. The power cord has an end that goes into the computer. Notice three little holes in here. That goes into the computer. And then, of course, the familiar looking plug that goes into the wall. So let's find where this first piece goes in the back of the computer. Here we are on the back left-hand side. You can see the three little prongs. We're going to put this upside down, see the three prongs, and put it right straight in. There's another power cord that is connected directly to the monitor. And you don't need to worry about this one because it comes permanently connected to the monitor before you've opened the box. So it is ready to plug in already. Now, however, we have to connect the monitor to the computer or the processor. And that is a slightly different cord. I want you to make note that this also is connected directly to the back of the monitor permanently. However, let's take a closer look at this cord. This is a lesson in Sex 101. If you take a close look at this connector, you'll see inside it a lot of little pins. This connector is called a male connector. This connector fits into, of all things, a female connector that has little holes in it in the exact same positions as these pins in this connector. That female connector is on the back of the computer. So let's go and look for that connector to match this connector. Now, you will see that there are several of these now that we've learned that lesson, and see if we can identify them before we plug this one into its proper place. Over here on the right side of the back of this computer Here is a long female connector. Notice all the holes. This is a long connector, so we know the one in my hand is definitely not going to fit into this female connector. Let's look below, down below. Here's another female connector. Notice all the holes again, but this is still a little wider. This is a 25 pin connector. Come over here to the left. Here is a male connector. Well, we know this will not fit here. Notice the pins here, little pins versus little holes. We don't want to be there. Let's come over. Remember, this is what this looks like. We're going to come back now and let's find it on the back of the processor. Not these two round ones, but here it is right there. Let's fit it in tightly. Put it in with force, but not too hard. Tighten its buttons, and now this connector has put the monitor online to the processor. We now have one more piece to connect before the computer is ready for us to use. That's the keyboard. So let's take the keyboard, check out its connection, and put it on the processor. Here's the last cord. Now, just like the monitor, it has to fit. The back of the processor has its own connector, and its connector, again slightly different. This one is round. If you can see carefully, you'll note that this is a male connector. See the pins inside, but it's round. And it will be easy to fit only because it has some flat surface here that can only go one way. So let's go look for the round female connector on the back of the computer into which to plug this keyboard. The main connector that we're looking for back here for the keyboard is connector number 1. Connector number 2 is for a mouse. So we'll talk about that later. Let's take the connector, put it in to connector number 1, tightly place it. It can only fit one way. Put it in firmly, and now the keyboard is ready for us to use. Let's look now at the whole unit, the computer, its monitor, the keyboard, and make sure that we're ready to plug this in. On the back of the keyboard, by the way, just to make it convenient, are two little feet. I'm going to turn it upside down. There are two little feet, one here on the left, one here on the right, just so that when we put it up, it's slightly tilted in the angle of our hands. Now, I'd like to, for a second, talk about the power into which we're going to plug the power cords of the computer. Most of you, perhaps in your homes now, do have protective power strips, but it's very easy to get them. You can get them in any computer store. You probably can get them in any department store now. This happens to be something called a spike bar. There are 6 plugs in this spike bar, and it automatically, in case of a storm, lightning, if a power surge comes through, it cuts off the power from the power bar and protects the computer. I suggest that any time you're plugging in a computer or its printers, make sure they're plugged into this kind of a strip before you even turn them on. Now that I have safely plugged the computer into the power strip and we're ready to check the computer itself, let's turn it on and look at the last piece that we need to be familiar with before we can work on the computer. The on-off button for the computer is down here on the lower right-hand side. See the 0 and 1. 1 means on. Push the button up. There is a separate on-off switch for the monitor, and I will simply turn that on. Trust me. Now the monitor and the computer are on, and we'll wait for the computer to warm up. Now, ordinarily, in our cycle, we would not be ready to see anything on the computer because it's new and there's nothing on it yet. However, in order for me to discuss briefly the keyboard, I wanted to have something on the screen so you could see how the keys function that are most important for your initial use. So let's look at the keyboard briefly. This keyboard is pretty standard. First of all, you'll notice on the very top of the keyboard a set of function keys, F1 through F12. A function key is a key that is pressed in order to bring you quickly either to a new menu or a new option, a new job function, without having to spell it out on the keyboard itself. We use those function keys in conjunction with instructions that actually show up on the screen and tell us to hit them at certain times. On the right side of the keyboard, you'll notice an accounting keypad just like a calculator. This should be familiar to anyone who carries a calculator in their briefcase or has one on their desk. This calculator has on the side of it a familiar key called the Enter key. This Enter key is exactly like the Enter key in the middle of this keyboard that looks like the typewriter keyboard. So if you hit the numbers on the keypad or the letters on the keypad here, and then hit an Enter key, either Enter key serves the same function. I don't want to spend too much time discussing the keyboard in detail because as we do some certain job functions on it, the keys that I hit, I will talk about as we use them. On the other hand, there are some things with which you ought to be just intimately familiar so that when I say hit this Enter key or hit this arrow, you'll know exactly what I'm speaking about. Briefly, I'm going to make a selection from the menu on this computer and have you watch my fingers on the keyboard so that you see how simple the keyboard is to follow. The 7th item on the menu says PFS Professional Write, and I want to choose that. It's a simple word processing function. It says choose option number 7. So I'm coming down to the keyboard and I hit a 7. I want you to watch that I'm hitting this 7, and I want you to watch the screen. I'm going to put a 7. Now, see how many 7s I hit there? By mistake, I held it down, and I got 4 of them. The key that makes this correct is called the backspace. Watch my... The importance of the backspace key is that it helps us to correct our mistakes. You simply hit the backspace to remove the mistaken characters until you're in the right place. Now I'm ready with that 7 to choose option number 7 on the menu, and the next thing I have to do is tell the computer that that is my selection by hitting the Enter key. Now the last thing that we look at on the keyboard now are the arrow keys. The arrow keys literally allow the cursor of the screen to point either to the left, to the right, or up the screen or down the screen. And that just helps us give the computer another means of directing it to go to a certain job function. Now that we've put the computer together, we're really ready to start from scratch to set it up with the job function that we may have bought at the store with the computer. We may have bought a word processor, we may have bought some spreadsheet, we could have bought some games. But one thing we didn't buy was a mouse. We'll actually talk about that on another lesson. Suffice it to say that the computer is ready for us to work on now, with the exception of perhaps one other piece of equipment, which we didn't hook up today, and that was a printer. Generally speaking, there's hardly a job function that you would run without having a printer. But we're going to actually spend a whole lesson talking about printers, their quality, their prices, the things that you do with them in order for you to make a good choice. So on that note, we should just wrap up this session by saying that the next lesson we're going to do is learn how to turn the computer on from scratch, load the program that we bought, and start using it. On that note, you can take a break, I'll take a break, and I'll see you on the next tape.